Hiya, Bryn. Today we're reading Chapter 2. Pippi cheers up Aunt Laura. One afternoon, Pippi was wandering around in her garden, waiting for Tommy and Anna to come over. But no Tommy came, and no Annika either, so Pippi decided to go and see where they were. She found them in their own garden, but they weren't alone. Their mother, Mrs. Settergren, was also there, and a very nice old lady who had come to visit. The two ladies were sitting under a tree, drinking coffee. Tommy and Annika were having fruit juice, but when they saw Pippi, they got up and ran to meet her. Aunt Laura came today, Tommy explained. That's why we couldn't come over to you. She looks so nice, said Pippi, peeking at her through the leaves of the hedge. I must talk to her. I'm so fond of nice old ladies. Annika looked a little worried. It may be best if you don't talk very much, she said. She remembered that once when Pippi had been to a coffee party, she had talked so much that Annika's mother had been very annoyed with her. And Annika was too fond of Pippi to want anyone to be annoyed with her. Pippi's feelings were hurt. Why shouldn't I talk to her? She asked. When people come to visit, you should be nice and friendly to them. If I sit there and don't say a word, she might think I have something against her. But are you sure you know how to talk to old ladies? Objected Annika. They need to be cheered up, said Pippi with emphasis, and that's what I am going to do. She walked across the lawn to where the two ladies were sitting. First, she curtsied to Mrs. Settergren. Then she looked at the old lady and clapped her hands. Just look at Aunt Laura, she exclaimed. More beautiful than ever. She turned to Tommy and Annika's mother. Please, may I have a little fruit juice so my throat won't be so dry when we start talking? Mrs. Settergren poured a glass of juice and said as she handed it to Pippi, Children should be seen and not heard. Well, said Pippi, looking pleased, it's nice if people are happy just to look at me. I must see how it feels to be used just for decoration. She sat down on the grass and stared straight in front of her with a fixed smile, as if she were having her picture taken. Miss Settergren paid no further attention to Pippi, but went on talking to the old lady. After a while she asked with concern, How are you feeling these days, Aunt Laura? Awful, replied Aunt Laura, just awful. I'm so nervous and worried about everything. Pippi jumped up. Exactly like my grandmother, she exclaimed. She got nervous and excited about the littlest thing. If she was walking in the street and a brick happened to fall on her head, she'd start to scream and make such a fuss you'd thought something terrible had happened. And once she was at a ball with my father and they were dancing a hambo together. My father is quite strong, and quick as a wink he swung my grandmother around so hard she flew straight across the ballroom and landed with a crash right in the middle of the bass fiddle. There she was, screaming and carrying on like anything. My father picked her up and held her outside the window. It was 4 floors up, so that she would cool off and not be so fidgety. But she didn't like it one bit. She hollered, Let me go this minute. My father, of course, did let her go, and you can imagine she wasn't pleased about that either. My father said he'd never seen anything like a fuss the dear old lady made over nothing at all. It certainly is too bad when other people have trouble with their nerves. Pippi finished sympathetically and dunked her Zweezy back into her fruit juice. I have no idea what that is. Tommy and Annika were fidgeting uneasily in their chairs. Aunt Laura shook her head in a puzzled way, and Mrs. Settergren said hastily, Well, I hope you'll be feeling better soon, Aunt Laura. Oh, yes, I'm sure she will, Pippi said reassuringly. My grandmother did. She was soon feeling very well. Aunt Laura wanted to know what cured her. Tranquilizers, Pippi said. That did the trick, I can tell you. She was soon as cool as a cucumber, and she'd sit peacefully for days at a time, just not saying a word. If bricks started falling on her head one after another, she'd just sit there and enjoy it. If it could happen to my grandmother, well, it could just happen to anybody. I'm sure you'll be well again soon, Aunt Laura. Tommy crept over to Aunt Laura and whispered in her ear, Don't mind anything Pippi says, Aunt Laura. She's just making it up. She doesn't even have a grandmother. Aunt Laura nodded understandingly, but Pippi had sharp ears and quite heard what Tommy had whispered. Tommy is quite right, she said. I don't have a grandmother. She doesn't exist. Since that is the case, why does anyone have to be so terribly nervous? Aunt Laura looked at Pippi for a moment with a dazed expression and then began to talk to Miss Settergren again. Pippi sat down to listen with the same fixed smile as before. After a few minutes, Aunt Laura said, Do you know, something very strange happened yesterday? But it couldn't be nearly as strange as what I saw the day before yesterday, Pippi said reassuringly. I was riding in a train, and we were going along full speed when suddenly a cow came flying through the open window with a big suitcase hanging on her tail. She sat down in the seat across from me and began to look through the timetable to see what time we'd get to Felkoping. I was eating a sandwich. I had loads of sandwiches. Some had sausage and some had smoked herring, and I thought she might be hungry, so I offered her one. She took the smoked herring one and swallowed it practically whole. Pippi fell silent. That is really very strange, said Aunt Laura politely. Yes, you'd go a long way before you'd find another cow as strange as that one, Pippi agreed. Just imagine, she took the smoked herring sandwich when there were still lots of sausage ones left. Mrs. Settergren interrupted to ask Aunt Laura if she would like some more coffee. She filled Aunt Laura's cup and her own and poured more fruit juice for the children. You were going to tell me about a strange thing that happened yesterday? She reminded the old lady. Oh, yes, said Aunt Laura, beginning to look worried again. Speaking of strange things happening, Pippi broke in hastily, you'll enjoy hearing about Adagon and Theodore. Once, when my father's ship came to Singapore, he needed a new able-bodied seaman, and we took on Adagon. He was 7 feet tall and so thin that his bones rattled like a rattlesnake's tail when he moved. He had pitch-black hair that came down to his waist and only one tooth. That tooth was all the bigger, though. It grew all the way down to his chin. My father thought Adagon was uglier than anyone should be, and at first he didn't want him on board. Only then he decided that Adagon might be useful to have around to scare any fierce wild horses into stampeding. Well, then they got to Hong Kong and realized they needed another able-bodied seaman, so we got Theodore, and they were much alike as a pair of twins. That certainly is a strange coincidence, exclaimed Aunt Laura. Strange? Said Pippi. What is so strange? That they looked so much alike, Aunt Laura replied. It is very strange indeed. No, Pippi said, not really, because they were twins, both of them, even from birth. She looked a bit reproachful. I don't quite understand what you mean, dear Aunt Laura. It is anything to worry about when twins happen to look alike. They can't help it, you know. Nobody have wanted to look like Agaton or like Theodore either, for that matter. Then why do you speak of strange coincidences? Aunt Laura asked, looking bewildered. Mrs. Settergren tried to divert Aunt Laura's attention. You were going to tell me about the strange thing that happened to you yesterday. Aunt Laura got up to leave. That will have to wait until another time, she said. On second thought, perhaps it wasn't so very strange after all. She said goodbye to Tommy and Annika. Then she patted Pippi's little red head. Goodbye, my little friend, she said. You are quite right. I'm beginning to feel better already. I don't feel nervous at all anymore." "Oh, I am so glad," said Pippi, and she gave the old lady a big hug. "You know, Aunt Laura, my father was very pleased about getting Theodore in Hong Kong, because then he said he could stampede twice as many wild horses." That's the end of chapter 2. I thought since they were having a little bit of a tea party that I would enjoy some chocolate cake today. I hope you have a good day tomorrow for Valentine's Day. Bye now, Bryn.